The Sustainable Development Goals offer an amazing opportunity to focus on children. Goal 8.7 is very focused on the worst forms of child labour. That includes things like modern slavery, trafficking, and the most hazardous and dangerous forms of work for children. This is our priority, and this is the focus that we all need to be having right now. Young Lives is a study of child poverty that has been following 12,000 children for 15 years in Ethiopia, in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, 2 states in India, in Vietnam and Peru. The study has always aimed to be very relevant for policy and practice. It covers many aspects of children's lives, including their aspirations, educational and occupational, their time use, the schools they go to, and the work that they do. The study has been following 2 groups of children, one group which was born in 1994 and another group that was born in 2001. And the idea behind that is to be able to interview the younger ones at the same age that we interviewed the older ones. This enables us to understand some of the trends and changes that are taking place in the environments in which they live. The study actually has a roughly equal numbers of boys and girls, which enables us to do a lot of work on gender. But it also includes ethnic majority and ethnic minority, religious majority and religious minority children, and children from rural and urban areas. This is important because the different groups of children in different locations, do very different kinds of work and different amounts of work. I think in general terms, one of the most important things that our evidence points to is that children lead really complicated lives with many, many demands on their time. This isn't just about attending school and going to work, it's also about caring for sick parents and younger siblings and so on. This, to me, points to the real importance of integrating policies. It always astonishes me, actually, that when we talk about children's work, we always think about labour policies. When we talk about their education, we always think about school policies. But actually, we need to integrate policies on labour and child work with policies on social protection, but we also need to integrate those policies with school policies. Schooling needs to be more flexible, needs to be adapted more to children's everyday lives, and we need to recognise that some children really do need to work in order to support their families, at least until such time as we have really strong social protection programmes across areas of poverty, communities and households that are affected by poverty. By talking directly to children and their families, to community members and teachers, we have learnt that work is extremely context specific. It varies greatly between the location that children live in, between children of different genders and different social groups, and also varies by their ages. So, for example, girls are often much more likely to be working in domestic chores and in care roles, unpaid work particularly, whereas boys are more likely to be doing paid work. This is particularly the case in rural areas where girls are already embedded in lifestyles and family formation roles from a very young age, and where boys begin by herding animals, by working in the fields, but they then move on to paid work as they get a little bit older. In urban areas, children may be more involved in paid work than they are in rural areas, just because there are more opportunities in urban areas for paid work. The important point about this is that for policy, this means being quite tailored to the specific types of work that children undertake in specific locations, and thinking also about different ages and the different roles that children play as they grow older. Younger children, for instance, may be doing important initial tasks, but they may not be expected to hold the same level of responsibility that older children hold. So by the time they've reached about age 12, 13, 14 or so, children in many contexts are already holding considerable responsibilities, including in some cases being the primary breadwinner in the family. I think it's really important to emphasise that children make a vital contribution to their families and to the family survival. Families are not expecting children to be dependent on them, they expect them to be co-contributors in family life. This is essential because many families don't have the resources to be able to allow anybody to be dependent on them. Everybody has to play an important role, and children get a lot of pride out of the contributions that they make to their families. One of the other really important findings from the study is that school, although it's seen as a child right, and although children have amazingly high educational aspirations, as do their families, it can be a very difficult place for children. We have quite a lot of evidence of girls, for example, not being able to attend school during menstruation because there's no privacy, there are no toilet facilities that they can use, of dangers that girls face on the way to and from school. Travelling to school can be quite a hazardous experience for them, but also experiences of violence within school. We've reporting from the children very high levels of corporal punishment and bullying in the school context. So although families have enormous aspirations for their children to do well at school, children are very committed to attending school, school is not always a positive experience. And then I think it's important for us to realise that work becomes increasingly important as children grow into their teens, because they know that they need to get jobs in the future. It provides a toe in the door for future employment as adults. It enables them to learn skills, not just practical skills of work, but also the important social skills of being able to work in a team. Until children can actually experience the certainty of good jobs in the future, the certainty of schools contributing to good jobs in the future, it's important that we allow them to enter the workplace in order to get themselves ready for adult employment. I think we've marshalled quite a lot of evidence on the everyday types of work that children do and the work that they do that combines with schooling. One of the really big gaps, however, is the worst forms of child labour. We're not really sure what we mean by hazardous and exploitative work. Some things are obvious: slavery, bondage, trafficking. Those are really obvious, really bad forms of work. But we don't necessarily know, for instance, how dangerous and in what ways it's dangerous for children to be working in the fields on their family farms and so on. Exposure to the sun, extreme heat, perhaps working long hours without much rest and so on. I think this is a really important gap and priority for research, because we need our policies to be informed by this kind of evidence. A second really important gap, which needs to be filled through further research, is to understand how children feel about interventions designed to address child labour. I don't think we can always assume that for children the interventions that we design are benign. I think another thing that we need to understand is what's going on in the world today with so many massive changes in the environments in which children are growing up. We know that economic growth has been quite widespread across developing countries, and we also know that school enrolment is now more or less universal. We see a large number of children migrating to urban areas with their families, or indeed on their own, but we don't really know how some of these dramatic changes are impacting children's work. In general, from Young Lives, the evidence is that urban children work less than rural children. The evidence is that school children are working less than children who are out of school. But I think we need to understand more about these trends, because it's a highly volatile and dynamic situation that many children are growing up in today. And then finally, it's really important for us to understand the kind of skills that children need as they grow up into adulthood. What kind of skills does work facilitate? Governments and other actors have many ideas about how to work with children and how to support working children for the best. It's really important to put children's best interests at the heart of any policies that we're thinking to plan. I think it's also really important that children have a say and they have a contribution to those policies. So in the realisation of Target 8.7, children's voices, children's interests, children's perspectives need to be integrated into any interventions that we're planning. And we need to be very focused on the things that children and adults and planners and policymakers agree that are the absolute priorities for children.